Good afternoon, everyone. Oops. Are you ready for this session? Yes, perfect. Because I'm not. Due to some corona-related issues, I've just accepted to replace a friend to be moderating this session, and I will perform what is known as PowerPoint karaoke. So please bear with me. Luckily, I have a few things to say about the subject. So, I have a career of 25 years as an engineer from the beginning. Do we have any female developers in the room? Woo! So was I once upon a time, but then I've done a career in various ways, and suddenly left the work of being operative, and I'm now a board director and an investor, and I've just started a fund that only invests in gender equal companies. Woo! And this fund, if you look at the gender equal companies, they perform much better than the ones that aren't gender equal. And we all know that, right? Because we know that it's, you know, if you have a gender equal company, you usually have diversity in other angles, and you usually have a creative environment. An environment where you listen to what people say and not who is saying what. So if you look at the gender equal companies on the Swedish stock market, during the past 3 years, they have performed 18 points better than index. So that is what we're doing to the companies. We're actually generating revenues and better profits. So I'm not here to talk about that, but that is a subject that I'm burning for. So this is the agenda for this next 45 minutes. First, we will look at a report about the gender gap between male and female CEOs on the Swedish stock exchange, companies that are listed there. And then we will discuss being a woman in a CA position, and we will end up with a panel discussion about female leadership. So Ernst & Young have just released a report on this subject, a pretty extensive report. I think it was launched today, about how we pay different CEOs, female versus male CEOs in Sweden. And the result is not as encouraging as we think or hope, but we are all here to change that, right? Yes. First, look how many female CEOs are there. Well, on the large cap list, there's only 11% female CEOs. Will you change that, ladies? Yes. Good. Right attitude. And if we look at the salaries, I mean, salaries are kind of one way of seeing how valued are these female CEOs, these 11%. And I assume that there's a bunch of engineers, as myself, knowing how to count and mathematics. And of course, it's not, as there are so few female CEOs, it's difficult to get a statistically significant result. But anyway, if you look at the base salary, in average, females get 29% lower salaries than men. And if you look at the part of the salary that is not fixed, like bonuses, option program, etc., females get 62% less paid. Of course, if you look at the numbers, I mean, this is severe, huge change, a huge difference. But if you look at the numbers, the females tend to be CEOs for smaller companies. So if you only look at the smaller companies at this list, the salary gap is 13% base salary and 39% in the moving moving part of the salary. That is still pretty much, right? And I think that there is something that we definitely need to rise, discuss, and we cannot accept this, right? No. I can tell you a personal story where I was newly divorced. I had 400 crowns above existence minimum, whatever that is in English. I was poor, or not poor, wasn't I? But yeah, anyway. And I started to discuss with my male colleagues. We had the same title. We had worked at the company for the same amount, same time. We had gone to the same university, almost the same years. We had the same, titles in the American management systems. We were doing the same thing. The only difference was that I had 3 teams and they had 1 or 2, and I earned 20,000 SEK less than them. But it took me 24 hours to change that. So it's possible. Another part of this study was showing that people that are in minorities, and I think it's very important, I think that gender equality is super important, and I think that looking at gender equality, it's also important to look at other parts of diversity. And both what I've experienced from my own personal experience during work, during my career, I've noticed that in environments that are gender equal, there usually is a diversity among other factors as well. So in a climate where it's okay to be a female, to come from another, have another religion or whatever, it seems to be a more creative environment. So this study looks at diversity from other angles as well, and it shows that people that are in minorities, in different kind of minorities, usually doesn't feel as welcome in the organization as the others, and usually don't feel that they have the same opportunities that others. And of course, if you don't feel that you have the same opportunities, how on earth are you going to make it, right? So we need to change that as well. I think this stopped working. There we have. So that said, we're going to bring up a female CEO on stage, Hélène Barnekow, CEO at Microsoft. Give her a warm applause. Hello, welcome. Hey, yeah, I think if you sit there and I'm sitting here, I think should we remove this table? Yes. Females, they see a problem, they solve it. No time to wait. Okay, welcome.
Thank you.
Nice to have you here.
Great to be here.
And what's your thought when you hear about the results in this
What's my
survey?
thought? So, in a disappointing way, I'm not surprised, right? Because we know this.
Yeah, we know
So, in a way, I look at surveys and I think we don't need another survey. We need people who do stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Because we actually know this. But it's still, every time you read something like this, it still hits you.
Yes.
Like, how can it still be like that? And I started out many years before you do, who are in the audience. And when I started, I never thought it would be like this. I don't know what you were thinking, but I never thought this would become an issue.
No.
And as I grew into this industry, I realized this is a huge issue, and it hasn't gone away. And it's not an industry thing only, even if the tech has its own problem. But you would have expected it to go faster.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think when I started my career, you went to university, you had, your grades, you're feeling, I know as much as the guys, I can do the same things. And people were talking about this glass ceiling and were like, I didn't really
No.
believe it was true
No,
until I
me
actually
neither.
experienced.
And you guys are much smarter. Everybody I meet who are younger than coming into the workforce, you are so tuned in to the reality. I was not tuned into that reality either. I thought I would, if I worked hard, if I had the same education, I worked hard and I did my thing and I was passionate about what I was doing, there would be no difference between me and my male colleagues.
And when it comes to salary, how have you experienced? Have you ever experienced like what I did?
Yes.
When yeah.
It took
What
me
did
a
you
bit
do?
longer than 24 hours when I discovered it, but Tuva is exceptional.
I was so pissed.
But I did no, I remember my moment. I hadn't thought of that for a long time, but I do remember my moment. And it was back at I was at Ericsson Mobile Phones, and it must have been back in '96 or something. And I remember exactly that moment. And I was working as a product manager, which was a very defined type of job. I loved my job, by the way. And I discovered exactly to your point. I think it was at least 20% difference. And I remember being so shocked. And I took it up with my manager, and I think he was first extremely surprised that I brought the issue to the table. And it took a little bit longer. It had to go through a number of approvals, but it was addressed and it was fixed.
Good. And because for me it's been, you know, the time before I actually understood that and after. Was it the same for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I had two. I would say I had two. One of the two, and I hadn't thought about this one, so it was a good reminder. But I had two things that became before and after.
Yeah.
This was one of them, and the second one was that I was in a company that was growing like crazy, so the promotions were happening really quickly, and we hired really strong women. I had actually lots of great women colleagues, but no women got promoted. And that was and it took me a while to kind of, you know, because you kind of look at yourself and say, no, you know, she was probably not as good, and I'm probably not as good. And then I thought, no, there's a pattern to this. There's definitely a pattern. And then I got promoted, and this goes back to 90, we're really talking a long time ago, maybe 96 or something. It goes back to something like this. And then I got promoted as the first woman. And I remember, and then, you know, at that time, you got the bigger office. I had a couch in my office. I had 3 windows. It was a big deal when I got promoted. I remember sitting on that couch and thinking, now, I'm the first one to be promoted.
Yeah.
And that comes with a huge responsibility that I change it.
Yes.
Now, I have to promote other women.
Yeah.
And I remember exactly when I was thinking that thought. So, and I brought that with me always.
Yeah. and what I did also when I took over a new team was doing, investigating the salaries to see if they were fair. And I always found at least one woman, sometimes also a man, of course, that was unfairly.
Always find. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and when you talk to the former manager, because that is also something that I do, because basically trying to make the world a better place, just inform them politely that this they have done something that wasn't really correct. And of course, they doesn't mean any, usually they get, they don't mean any harm. No. They're not doing it with bad intentions. It's just something that happens to happen.
I agree. And I think that's actually something to look out for, because I think this is maybe the main reason why this hasn't changed quicker. Because if it was by pronounced intent and it was really what people wanted, it would have been picked up in a different way. But there's so much unconscious bias. And this is the hardest one to actually address.
Yeah.
Because then it's really, you can't really touch it, right? And then you have to, and salaries is a good way to look at it then, because then it becomes numbers. But I think the unconscious bias is why this is taking so long, because it's norm recreation.
Yeah.
And that's really hard.
And we get it from birth, right?
Yes.
It's not something that you just come into workplace and you find, you follow the culture at that place. It's something that you bring with you.
Yes.
And speaking of that, I'm thinking the other part of this report, talking about different minorities, and as a CEO and a leader at large, how have you worked in getting them better introduced in the company and feeling that they have the same opportunities that the rest?
And this is a really good point. I completely agree with what you said before. So actually, I think sometimes I feel like we should separate, or not separate, but still articulate equality and diversity in 2 ways, because it's actually, otherwise we get stuck on sometimes only thinking gender, and it's both things, and I think it goes together. Now, I think one of my learnings on that is, I think, from 2 angles. One is that the inclusion piece is as important as diversity. And as a company speaks about diversity or equality, you need to have as much focus on inclusion.
Yes.
And many companies I know and worked for don't talk inclusion. They only talk
Yeah.
the first part. And the first part will not come unless you really have that inclusive environment.
Yeah.
And even if you attract people, they will leave because they will not feel that they can make their voice heard or be effective or anything. So I think that piece is extremely important. The other one is to, I think, finding people who actually want to come and work for you. I think you need to think about how do you look as a company for somebody who doesn't look like you to want to come and work there. So I think it actually starts with being quite active yourself, finding people who are not the norm in that company, bring them into visible positions.
Yes.
As soon as there's somebody visible, you you send a very clear message that, but it is possible.
Yes.
It's not based upon bias. It's not based upon that they went to the same school, the same daycare center, they're all blonde, they're all men, or all women in some cases. So I think bringing that in and it sends really strong messages.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, I get the question sometimes when every leadership team I have handed over to somebody has always been either 40% women or 50% women. Right now, we're actually 58% women at Microsoft. So that's even, that's maybe a bit even too much by coincidence. But I've always handed over leadership teams that have been a mix of men and women. And it's never actually been hard.
No.
It's not even difficult to do that. And I very often get the question, but how do the men react? And, does that become negative? But the opposite. Every smart man I know actually prefer working in those teams.
Yeah.
It's not like, oh my gosh, there's so many women, I don't want to work there. It's the opposite.
No.
All the smart men want to work in those teams.
Yeah.
But what they get brought into is not that.
I think it is also, the environment makes it more a creative,
Absolutely.
creative team.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I think something that you referred to before that I used to be a bit cautious about is, the inclusion part.
Yes.
Making sure not only hiring a woman, actually including her in the discussions. And I think that I used to talk about being invited to a room versus being invited to discussion. And also I have as a ground rule myself, and I have had for several years, to never accept anything, basically, if it's talking in a panel or if it's a job where I'm only there as a woman, where they say, we need a woman to this panel. And I said, okay, but then you can take your little sister or someone.
Yes.
And I think that is also so. And when we started this fund, then we were looking into, our first we wanted to have a fund that was only invested in diversified companies, but we realized it was too difficult to get out data on where people origin from and those kind of things. So from that sense, it was really simple to look at gender. And my experience is that with gender usually comes diversity.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I think it somehow, because then you have a more open mindset, and it's not, once you establish that, once you know that that's the rhythm of that company, it goes for, I think you're right, it goes for everything, because then I think you actually, for the first time, really are looking only for competence.
Yes.
And then it happens by itself.
Yes.
If you're not fixed in your mind unconsciously to look in one group or the same group you always looked in, but you actually do this properly.
Yeah.
So I think it goes together.
And before we take in the panel, I just want to ask you, when did you decide that you want to be a CEO? Or did you ever decide?
No, I never decided.
You never decided? No. But how did you become a CEO?
It happened.
It happened.
No, I never even thought, the only thing I knew when I had graduated is that I wanted to work internationally. And that's what I'd done most of my life. And then most of my positions have been multi-markets, that I've been responsible for teams in many different markets and continents, and I've lived in many countries, and I've loved it. And so this thing about diversity becomes quite easy.
Yeah.
My last leadership team before moving to Sweden, I had one of the guys was from Malaysia, one of the women on the team were from Egypt. People were from all over the place, so it's easy when you're in those positions. Easier. But and then 2014, I think, I was convinced and attracted to move to Stockholm as Telia was building up a whole new executive management and board and everything after the crisis they had in Eurasia. So I moved to Stockholm, and not to be CEO, but to have one of those international positions for Telia. And when I had been there almost a year, I think, I was asked to take on the CEO position for Telia Sweden. So that was the first time I was a CEO. I had several P&L roles. I came from the product and the marketing side. So I came from actually working extremely embedded into R&D and then marketing and more commercial channels, etc. But it wasn't a decision. And it's fun. But I could think of a lot of things that are fun. So I'm not so title focused on what's the good thing by being a CEO of some sort of organization, I think, is actually questions like this.
Yeah.
You do get a really good platform for truly influence an organization on these types of questions that are, to me, closest to my heart.
Yeah.
That's the best thing about it.
Good answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Stay on, Hélène, and we will invite the rest of the panel. So if we have Lotta Lovén and Pernilla Wikman on stage, and while they are entering the stage, please take a few seconds to answer this Slido question. Welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Please sit down.
Hi, Hélène.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Please sit down. So if you take your time and answer this Slido question as seen. Oh, what is the most important attribute a leader should have today? So welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pernilla, you've been in, I will start with a question that I'm very intrigued in hearing an answer to, because I read in a paper like 1 year ago or something that you said something about let's not discuss the glass ceiling anymore. What did you mean with that?
But
Isn't there a glass ceiling? And
what do you think? Is there a glass ceiling?
yes.
I think so too. But I was actually asked from the perspective of a gender. And I said like this, that I'm a bit tired of discussing it from a gender perspective, and that summarized a bit what you already have discussed, because I think that we have a huge system error instead. We have systems that are really closed, systems that are unmature to bring in deviation equal to the minorities that was your yellow dots in the PPT here before. And by not doing that, we are missing out a lot about when it comes to innovation. And that means, of course, now we have talked about mainly from a gender perspective. And to be very clear, understand me correctly, it is a huge failure that we don't have more females and mixed teams. But in one way, it might create a question of polarization, and it might go too slow in the change. But I think it's an even bigger failure that we are not talking about it from a team diversity. What if we are building up open systems that actually can embrace all kind of minorities? Because we know that, of course, the result of the businesses are we are creating so much better result. You said 18, I've heard up to 20% better result. What if we include all of the minorities? Are we talking 50%, 300% better? And we are here to maximize result. So I think that is madness. So let's talk about how do we actually crash the system and create more open system for people to be people.
I actually read a study on that. I mean, gender equal companies, about 15 to 20% better performance, and diversification. I mean, if you take everything, but it's very difficult to count, but they assume that is something 35%. So that's
it is
completely true, and I think it's.
And I think also like this, by just if we are talking about it from one perspective, which we should, but we should talk about it in a much broader perspective, we become much stronger in changing the system.
Yeah.
And that is like 1 is stronger than 10, right? And that is a way for keeping the system still being closed for change. So that was what I meant.
Yeah. Now I understand you fully.
But maybe a bit
so Lotta, you are leading a huge team at Swedbank, right?
Yes.
It's super. And how do you work with these questions? And
I think this is very interesting from many perspectives. You were talking about salary. I think you have to choose what questions you pick and where you are an unconscious driver. I think my team believes that I'm very picky on this. I believe I sent back the salary review 3 times this year because it wasn't equal. Because I believe that you have to put some statements on important questions. But I have been working on those things several years, and I think it really starts with recruitment. What people do you add on to your team? And I have had a strategy of kind of collecting good people, and preferably women and young women, actually, to give them the opportunity, and not necessarily always having a role for them in-house. Or I have several examples where I, for example, last year hired a very professional woman to a role in my organization, but 6 months later she took on one of the most important roles in Swedbank as head of sales and service in the Swedish organization. And then I got a very funny question. So I said, "Why do you allow this? Didn't you hire her?" And I said, "Gee, what kind of question is that?" But this shows that we still need to work very hard on those topics. Then I have had, now from 1st of January, I got a new organization. Financial services are primarily men. I have been kind of a squarish thing to put in a round hole, or the opposite, like not very bankish, pink sneakers, not very financial looking, and driving things that are more from customer experience and not very figure-like topics. But we have succeeded in having this equality, and and I agree with you. It's not only female or male; it's all kinds of minorities. But then I got this new department from 1st of January with the prime IT, the infrastructure and network and operations, and then I realized that now I have to start all over again. But I have promised myself that within a couple of years, we will be equal there as well. So I think it's hard work. You have to have the positive ambition and be a role model yourself, and be brave, I think.
Yeah, and I think personally that this, and that is also why we started this fund, I don't think that this will happen automatically. No, we need to have conferences like this, unfortunately, although we like being here. I mean, we need to have it for a few years, at least more, and we need to do things. And I think maybe some public shaming in some cases, where Albright is doing an excellent job pointing out who is not on the right.
But the thing is that you said one very wise thing as well, that it's more fun to work in those teams.
Yeah.
And everyone thinks so. And if you only start focusing on our targets, what are we going to achieve, who are the best persons, and be really fact-based, then I can promise that you get equality.
Yeah, because, I mean, Helen, for example, when you recruit people, I mean, it's not difficult to find a talented woman, right?
No, so I think to qualify that conversation, I started, since I set out to say that I have to build equal leaderships early on, I started doing something very early on, which is a really good, super simple things, but I started demanding that we have both men and women on the shortlist. And if we don't have both men and women on the shortlist, I don't sign off. It's very simple. And then when you're new in an organization, they try 3 times that you will sign off because they say it's so urgent, the project is going to be late if you don't sign off on this man. And then you say no and say then the project will have to be late. And then eventually they will always have come with men and women on the shortlist. So it really works. Now, there are some exceptions where it's difficult. Most of the time, it's actually not difficult. And then there's some exceptions, because there are, and this is really important for Sweden. There are technical educations where the representation of women is just way too low. And it's a real, real problem for Sweden. I honestly don't think we understand yet what a problem that is. So some jobs I look for, some positions I look to fill, even when we go straight to the universities, maybe there are 15% who are women in those classes. And those can be classes on artificial intelligence, for example. And to me, this is actually a democratic issue, not just a business issue. So there are some positions where it's real, and sometimes if I say I want this type of technical profile and I want the person to be based in Gothenburg, close to a customer, then sometimes I actually don't find women. But they're very specific cases. So if you take most of them, we will find both men and women for those shortlists. But the point is, for all of you who study in technical positions, this is so important. And you have such a mission to be good ambassadors for women, to understand
Get more.
how much fun and how much influence you're going to exercise in society by choosing the tech industry. There's nothing more important right now, I think.
Yeah.
I would like to add one more thing as well on this, and that is I think that it's important for all companies to have an inclusiveness towards men as well, in terms of not being the standardized male roles.
Yes.
So the values of a company for all employees or people working or customers, and also that you are empowering men to be home with kids and stay home for a while. So right now I actually have two persons in my management team, both men that one just came back and one that is on 9 months paternity leave.
Yeah.
And I think that's good.
Yeah.
So I think that you need to empower men to be diverse as well.
Yes. And how, yeah.
Yes.
I think I got one of the best career advice in the beginning of my career, which was find an equal husband that is willing to do half. I didn't, but
But it was good advice.
it was a good advice.
But I agree on that one, because in the same interview, I got a question regarding how important is your manager.
Yeah.
And I said, manager comes, manager goes, right?
Yeah.
What you should pay attention to is that you find a partner that actually think diverse it. And I think if I would give any kind of advice, it's actually to think about that.
Yes.
Who you are teaming up with. So you are finding someone that you are teaming up with that actually are supporting your own growth.
Yeah.
Because when we talk about this with the system and how to really bring in diversity, that is a really big question. It's not only in the corporation, in the organization, it's also in the society. So I would say absolutely the same. One of the strongest advice to give.
That's also my advice, even if I didn't
for sure.
succeed.
For
with
sure.
it. Difficult.
Better luck next time.
I'm a bit too old to have next time, but anyway. But
I think we all are.
I think that there's also an article that says that being a supermom and having a top career does not match, and to some extent I think that is true, but also to some extent not, because I think that I've been alone with 2 kids more or less, and I still have some kind of a career, and I think that you shouldn't forget that life is long, right? It's both short and long. It's too short to skip those valuable years when the kids are young, but it's still long that you don't, being present when the kids are small. My kids are teenagers now. They don't want to hang with me. So
And then I think it's pretty interesting to ask ourselves, what is the definition of a supermom?
yeah, true.
Because now we go into our own unconscious bias stating
Yeah.
that this is a supermom.
Yeah.
I would say I'm a supermom when my son, he was 6 and he's 16 today, asking me when will we have a Swedish prime minister, because he thought that was really, really strange.
Yeah.
And I can unfortunately still not tell him when we will have a female prime minister, which I think is,
Yeah.
So
Totally
being
agree.
a supermom can be a lot of different things.
Yeah,
That is what I'm proud of.
I actually hope that we will not need these kind of conferences in a short while.
Yeah.
Because I think it's so stupid that there should be a discussion about differences, because we are equal, and I think that everyone that has collaborated in a team know that.
Yeah.
So just continue. I'm very impressed by your 24 hours. That one I
was very happy. I was very
it's
angry.
good. And I really hope that some of you in here take this with you, because it's not okay, kind of.
No.
And we must come over this barrier. We have been talking about for year and year and year, but I really hope that we soon come out of this discussion, because for me, I see no difference, and I hope that many leaders are like me. in this perspective.
Exactly, and I think that it's a time to. I think it's time to stop talking because everyone knows this, right? Everyone knows that the companies with that are gender equal perform better. There's a lot of research around it. There's a lot of articles. Even if you only read Dagens Industri, you can't have missed it, right?
No.
So I think it's time to basically, have no more fucks to give and more be.
It's just go out and do.
Yeah, go out and do.
But I think on
Claim
the
your
topic
space
of on the
and your salary.
and I agree on the discussion. But on the topic of husbands versus managers or wives or whatever it is, partners, I think I would still say, if I look back at my career, it's the companies I've worked for where the leaders have been both supportive and progressive on this topic that have actually enabled me to progress myself. And once in my career, I had a manager who didn't support me and didn't support women whatsoever. I inherited him. I didn't choose to work for him. Sometimes you inherit managers. And I knew after 3 months that I had to leave.
Yes.
Sure, I could have stayed on, but I probably would not have been where I am now, for example, because I would not be able to progress. So I would advise to have very open eyes in terms of how is that culture. And even if it's not the immediate leader, but is the next leader then supportive? And do everything you can to use your platforms to influence. But if you don't have that, there are 1,000 other companies who need your competence, who need your smart, who want to see you progress, who has an inclusive culture. Because I have seen women who are holding on, who are not letting go and thinking what I was thinking in the beginning. If I just work hard, they will eventually discover me.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that everywhere. And don't waste your talent too long if you have a manager like that.
I've been through the same thing, and I knew after 3 months.
Yes.
But it took me like a year to leave.
To act.
Yeah, because I was, and the funny thing is that the tragic thing is that during this time I had a slide deck that I used to go to different universities, kind of, different advice to younger females, and one of them were, if you don't have a good manager, leave in time, and still I didn't do it.
You have this thing about not taking advice, I think.
I'm good at giving advice.
But I think that this is something that goes back to many of us. When you were talking about that, I actually did the reflection that I have, for the first time in my life, a male manager.
Is that the first time?
Yeah.
Wow.
Think of it. I have inherited some of them, but I have chosen most of them. But I haven't done it from that they have been female or male, but because they have been good leaders. So I think that this is something you really should consider on, because if you don't feel the happiness of being at work and being in an inclusive and collaborative environment where you have support, finally you will not think it's fun to go to work.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
definitely true. I think before we leave this panel, I think we should. I mean, you are all very successful leaders at. CEO of Microsoft. What's your title now, Lotta?
It's actually CIO.
CEO now at Swedbank.
How does that feel?
Exactly.
And VP of Global Business at Telia. I mean, you have high positions at very successful large companies, so you are truly leaders. And I would say, and the audience have been writing some different words which they believe are important attributes for a leader. Do you agree? Empathy, empowering, inclusive, supportive, good listener. Is it anything you spontaneously...
So great words up there. I love empathy, by the way.
Yes.
I think that is such a key to how we build, if we talk about inclusive cultures
Yes.
and all of that. I sometimes, when I try to, so I like everything you put up there. I sometimes, when I try to think about it and simplify, which I try to do, I combine 2 words that I think are in combination, something which to me defines, helps to become a good leader. And that's courage together with humility.
Yeah.
And the reason I pick those 2 is because if you want to be a leader in some sort, there are no leadership positions that don't entail a lot of difficult decisions. And if you duck difficult decisions, it's really hard for the teams around you. So you need to have that courage to do the right thing, and it's sometimes really tough. And you need the humility to really be listening in, open, understanding other perspectives, and understanding the effects that your decisions have on other people.
Yes.
Then you become human as well in what you're doing at the same time as you have that courage to actually go and do the difficult
And I think
things.
one important thing that I've noticed is to understand when you actually, I mean, it's very easy to take a decision without really understanding it.
It's very easy for me too.
Yeah. And also, I mean, it could be
Yeah.
that you're standing at the coffee machine and you say something to someone.
Yes.
Have we looked at?
Yeah.
And then someone is putting everything aside and starts to do some research about it. And it's really important to have an environment where people can tell you, no, we shouldn't do this.
And we're not doing it. Yes.
No.
Yeah.
This is not the right thing to do. And I think that's something.
Completely agree.
Yeah.
That's called respect or something.
Yeah.
And that is to build some kind of safety, psychological safety, so people can be humans. And I agree completely what you are saying, Hélène. I would like to add the word that means a lot to me, except courage, because I think that is of high demand, but it's also curiosity. Curiosity is as important as IQ and EQ.
Yeah.
Because that is what is creating and changing this whole way about the system, what is driving innovation, and that comes into curiosity about yourself, but regarding others. Because I think as a leader, you need to be extremely curious about business and the people that is working in the business, because they are the one creating it, and that comes to really understand and get to know the ones that you are working with. So that is what I would like to add.
I think you have summarized it perfect,
think-
so I have nothing to add.
I think, thank you so much. Super
you.
interesting.
Thank
I heard about this panel that went last year or whatever, that went on for 2 hours. I'm sorry that we couldn't hold on for that long.
We are on
I need
overtime
to
now.
run. Overtime. I need to run. I have another session. But thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Sharing
in the
your thoughts.
audience for listening.